Hi there, it's been a while. I'm in lockdown, I've grown a bit of a beard, and I've spent my time watching the films of the late great Japanese director Akira Kurosawa, and I thought, since I have the time, why not do a quick ranking of his entire filmography? That's right, like all 30 of his films. His career lasted from 1943 till 1993, and there's a lot of stuff that he did, a very diverse set of work, and I thought, now's the time to rank them. It's worth remembering that his career went through a few phases. He began in the 1940s making propaganda films for the Japanese government, and then he made films under the American occupation. And then in 1950 he basically reached international acclaim when his film Rashomon was basically the first Asian film to get any international recognition, and it got serious international recognition. He then spent the next 15 years basically leading the Japanese golden era of cinema, and he basically was the name of Japanese cinema worldwide. He pioneered so much that everything from westerns to Star Wars are inspired and all their legacy to Kurosawa. After 1965 his career took a significant downturn because he tried to go to Hollywood and that didn't work out, and then he also had a very unfortunate suicide attempt, which is very, very sad to hear. But he still made films about one every 5 years, and he continued that until his death. By the time he did die in the late 1990s, he had established himself as probably the most renowned filmmaker on the planet. He's probably up there with just Stanley Kubrick and John Ford as the greatest technical director there ever was. You know, there's certainly debates as to who is most artistic and most profound, but in my opinion, he's one of the few who knew how to direct a scene and craft a sequence better than anybody else. I think Kurosawa is a magnificent director, and I'm going to go through all of his films from worst to best. And all of my writing about all these films are in the description if you want to actually read extra thoughts that I have, because this is going to be quite quick in some places. I also apologise for any Japanese I mispronounce. I don't speak Japanese. So, all that said, let's go. So in 30th place has to be Sanshirogata Part 2. This film from 1945 isn't very interesting. It's basically just a sequel to Kurosawa's debut movie, and it's not that interesting. It comes out in 1945, World War II. It's a propaganda film. It has this undertone of Japanese supremacy, which, you know, could be seen as a bit icky. Honestly, I don't think it's very interesting. It's just really, really boring. Not much happens. There's a few fight scenes that are quite cool, and Kurosawa definitely has some skill, but honestly, this is a very skippable film, and probably the least interesting film he ever actually directed. At number 29, I've gone for Scandal, which came out in 1950. It's a story of a celebrity who gets gossip written about them in a magazine, and they decide to sue them. It's not very interesting, to be honest, but it is kind of light and fine. It's not too bad, it's just a bit cheesy. I think this is a case of it's just a film that doesn't have much substance to it, and Kurosawa isn't really suited to this kind of story. I feel like he makes a lot better, more humanist films in other ways. I feel like this kind of social drama about a courtroom it's just very bland. And it's fine, this is funny and entertaining at times, but coming where it does in his career, just after his propaganda and occupation movies and just before he's about to receive international attention, it really is kind of caught in two worlds and ultimately a bit of a nothing film. Scandal is utterly fine, but utterly unmemorable in almost every respect. At number 28, I've gone for The Most Beautiful, which comes from 1944. It's another propaganda film by Kurosawa, and it's actually a much more of a propaganda film. It's about women in a factory and their contributions to the war effort. It's perfectly fine and actually it's pretty well made, even though it's clearly from a director who's inexperienced and hasn't yet refined his techniques. But it's actually really watchable and quite heartwarming for what it is. The problem is you have to just kind of forgive the kind of moral aspects of it and the messaging of it, and it also requires a bit of patience because it's not very interesting. It is just people in a factory. Even if the film manages to find ways to make them compelling, it's a lot better than the first two films I mentioned on this list, but it's also very, very skippable, and it's certainly not a Kurosawa film that I think you should be seeking out unless you really are trying to just complete his filmography. At number 27, sticking with Kurosawa's earliest films, I'm picking The Men Who Tread on the Tiger's Tail, which he filmed in 1945, but it wasn't released until 1952. It's only 1 hour long, and it's basically his first samurai movie, but it's just not very, very interesting. It's basically just a bunch of people have to get through a checkpoint smuggling a lord from point A to point B. It's fine, it has its fun moments, and it's quite a comedy piece actually, so it's quite fun and easygoing. But it has virtually no substance. Nothing really ever is gripping, it's just kind of short and sweet. So it's fine, it's perfectly fun to watch, but in a career filled with long epics and meaningful films, this is just a bit shallow and pointless. It's fine, give it a watch, but I would certainly say this is, in the weaker side of his filmography. So at number 26, I'm going to go for Kurosawa's debut movie, Sanshirogata from 1943. This is actually an interesting film. It's not a propaganda film really, although aside from a couple of subtle traditional values kind of things that are thrown in there, and actually it shows a lot of promise. It shows instantly that Kurosawa knew how to direct movement and action, and it's a perfectly fine and fun little sports drama, which is all it basically is, just about judo and jiu-jitsu. It's nice and easygoing. It's not great, it certainly doesn't have anything that's particularly inspiring, and it is a little forgettable, but for the time it was innovative and it was very much acclaimed in Japan. So whilst Sanshirogata is no masterpiece, it's a decent film, but sadly one of Kurosawa's weakest. At number 25, I'm going to put Rhapsody in August, which is right from the other end of Kurosawa's career and is his second to last film. It's kind of an odd one. It's about the aftermath of the dropping of the atomic bomb in 1945, and it deals with reconciliation between Japanese and Americans, which is kind of an odd topic. I would say this film is pretty naive about how Americans have responded to nuclear weapons. And Richard Gere turns up rather interestingly in a supporting role, and is actually really good. The problem with Rhapsody in August is essentially that it's just kind of naive, and the characters are not really believable in a way that a contemporary film or contemporary social drama should be trying to achieve. But it's perfectly nice, it has some really good imagery, and considering that it's advocating for love and peace and things, I think it's got a worthwhile message. It's just not Kurosawa at his best. At number 24, I've gone for No Regrets for Our Youth, which is another mid-1940s film by Akira Kurosawa. It's post-war, and it deals with explicit political events in the 1930s, and so it's an interesting film because it looks at fascism and it looks at specific politics in a way which Kurosawa often avoided. It's also worth saying that it's one of his few films with a female lead, played by Setsuko Hara, best known for her work with Ozu. I think this is an interesting film, and it's certainly a fascinating piece because it stands alone and distinct in his filmography. But having said all that, I don't think it's necessarily a really well put together piece. It has some stunning camera work and the cinematography is amazing, but the pacing is a bit off and it's a bit wonky at times. But overall, it's an interesting effort, and I think we're at a point where this list is containing pretty much only good films. At number 23, I've gone for The Quiet Jewel, which deals with a doctor who contracts syphilis and having to do with social norms and relationships in the context of 1940s Japan. This is an interesting film. I think it has a very interesting social issue at its centre, and I think as a drama it's perfectly well constructed. I don't think this is as compelling as some of the other films Kurosawa made in the same era, which is why it ranks so low here, but that doesn't mean I don't have a lot of respect for what this film was trying to do, and I certainly think overall this is an admirable effort from Akira Kurosawa. At number 22, I'm placing I Live in Fear, which I think is the weakest film from Kurosawa's kind of golden era of the 50s and 60s. That's not to say this is a bad film. In fact, this is a really good film and I definitely recommend it. It's just a case of it's not as compelling as some of the others from the same point in time. I think this is really interesting. It deals with one of Kurosawa's constant themes, the fear of nuclear annihilation, which he came back to a lot in his late career. But in particular at this point, this is interesting because it's a 1950s film dealing with that fear, which makes sense. I mean, Godzilla came out around the same time as this, so this was definitely something in the Japanese psyche at the time. I suppose the key question of this film is what's more insane, to over-prepare for nuclear annihilation or under-prepare? And actually, I don't really know what the answer is. It's a thoughtful film and it makes you think and grapple with these questions. I don't think it's the best film that Kurosawa was making around this time, but at the same time, it's well worth a watch. At number 21, I've gone for Madadayo, which is Kurosawa's last film, and it fits really well as a last film because it's about a teacher being fondly remembered by his students. And I think that is exactly the position that elderly Kurosawa probably saw himself in, given that he was, you know, in his 80s when he made this film, and everyone in the world who was making films was essentially inspired in some way or other by him. He was the teacher and they are his children. The film is very, very touching and moving and actually very, very heartfelt. It's a wonderful film. But it just isn't as compelling as some of the efforts I'm going to mention in a bit. I think this is really solid stuff and it is really moving and it has a lot of beer drinking, which is kind of fun and weird to see. But ultimately, I think this is just kind of fine and definitely on the lower end of his filmography, but it's definitely worth checking out because it's a swan song that just makes perfect sense. At number 20, I'm going for Deska, which was Kurosawa's first film in colour, made in 1970. It comes just after his attempt to make a Hollywood film totally failed, and it definitely represents a dark point in his life. The film is definitely a dark film at times, even if it is also comedic. It's a medley of poverty dealing with a big ensemble cast, all with different issues and little stories that all kind of intersect by a shared location. It's a beautiful film, and I think it reflects Kurosawa's state of mind at this point. It's not perfect, but it's certainly fascinating and it's really well made in general. I think this is worth checking out and I think this is a moving story of people living in dire circumstances. So at this point, everything on this list I'm going to recommend and I think they're all great and they're all masterpieces and you should check them all out. So at number 19, I'm picking One Wonderful Sunday, which is this incredibly sweet rom-com social drama from the 1940s. It's about a couple who are poor but meeting up to go on a date, and it's basically just from that premise that we get this really little sweeping little piece about people finding love in even when they don't have much, and I think it's so moving and so charming, and it's melancholic but it's also funny and it's also lovely. It's everything, and it's just a very emotional and beautiful little piece from the 1940s. It doesn't necessarily stand out as being an utterly huge and memorable work, but it is utterly charming and I adored watching this film. At number 18, I've gone for Dreams, which comes from the latter end of Kurosawa's career and is a completely unique film. It's like nothing else he made. It's this surreal art house piece and it's literally just a series of short films based on Kurosawa's actual dreams. It's utterly beguiling and something to get absorbed into because it's really interesting. You know, you can kind of see things that reflect his mind, reflect his worries, reflect what he likes and what he doesn't like, and it's a very interesting film in that regard. It's not a film that I think is necessarily like magnificent, but at the same time it's breathtakingly beautiful and utterly, utterly wonderful. At number 17, I'm going for The Lower Depths, which comes from the 1950s, and is this interesting film because Kurosawa is often considered a fairly light and humanist director, but this is quite a dark and nihilist piece. It's about peasants in feudal Japan and poverty and people who live lives that aren't really worthwhile. It's kind of a reverse of kind of the heroics that he's generally known for. Instead, Kurosawa here makes a film that is more despairing, more depressing. And even though the film is not exactly cheery, it does have small signs of life and joy within it. It's based on a Russian play, and that makes total sense. Kurosawa loved Russian culture, as you can see in many of his films, and this totally fits in with what we would see in books and films like How to Be a God. This is an interesting piece, it's definitely different, and I think this is a fascinating counter to a lot of Kurosawa's bigger, better known, lighter films. At number 16, I've gone for Sanshirogata, which is basically this brilliant samurai action movie from the 60s. It's a sequel to one of Kurosawa's earlier films, and it's really, really fun stuff. It's completely shallow, essentially. It doesn't really have much substance in it compared to a lot of the better Kurosawa films, but that's really my only complaint. Otherwise, it's a really fun film, and it has an awesome killing right at the end. I think as a film, it's fun and it's entertaining, and it passes the time so easily. Some people rate this a lot higher than I do. I do think it just lacks the depth that I prefer from a lot of Kurosawa's other movies, but this is perfectly entertaining, and obviously, you know, a masterpiece of its kind. Top half now. At number 15, I've gone for Dezu Uzala, which is Kurosawa's only film made outside Japan basically entirely. It was made in the Soviet Union, and it's an interesting film about many of Kurosawa's favourite themes. First of all, it's Russian, and then also it's about a man or a hero finding, you know, value in old ways, value in the past, and I think that kind of sums up a lot of Kurosawa's attitudes to many things, perhaps, especially his fantasy historical worlds that he often created. This is based on a real story, and it's a colour movie, so it's a epic movie in terms of how it looks. It is one of Kurosawa's best looking films, and it has this really nice poetic side to it. It's a film without much of a plot, to be honest, although it is based on a real story, and basically it just kind of unfolds very naturally and just has this very moving look at man and nature and the way that they intersect. I would consider this an absolutely wonderful film. At number 14, I've gone for Drunken Angel, which comes from the 1940s. It's an early Yakuza flick, which, you know, is another testament to Kurosawa's ability to kind of get in on things early and inspire generations to come. It's about the interplay between a gangster and a doctor. It's worth noting as well that this is the very first film where Kurosawa worked with the legendary actor Toshiro Mifune, who was his lead actor in a lot of Kurosawa's films and appeared in every Kurosawa film but one during Kurosawa's golden era. He is a magnificent actor, and he instantly shows it in this debut. As a film, Drunken Angel is a lively and interesting film. It's short, but it has a lot of kick to it, and there's a really great scene involving paint towards the end. This is clearly one of the best films Kurosawa made in the 1940s, and a really strong piece. It might be the very first film he ever made that was a genuine masterpiece. At number 13, I've gone for Stray Dog. Stray Dog is Kurosawa's best film from the 1940s by far. It's like a pulpy detective film, but it also kind of introduces tropes that we might now associate with buddy cop movies. It once again stars Mifune, and it is really, really strong story. It has a rookie cop and an old veteran, and between them they are very compelling characters. It's a really interesting film that deals a lot with Japan's recent history at the time. It deals with reactions to World War II and reactions to poverty and reactions to society changing, and I think it's a really profound little piece. I think this is, you know, obviously a masterpiece, and I think the fact that he made so many more better movies shows how talented he was, because this is utterly amazing cinema. So at number 12, I've gone for Kurosawa's first film from the 1960s, The Bad Sleep Well. The Bad Sleep Well is just an utter masterpiece of a film. It is very, very loosely inspired or maybe inflected by Hamlet, dealing with a man taking revenge for his uncle's death, and it's a big stinging critique of Japan's corporate culture, dealing with the ways that corporations expect people to basically work until death for them. This is a very interesting film. It's very moving at times, and it's got a lot of moving pieces that Kurosawa keeps perfectly paced. The opening 20 minutes is a brilliant set piece that is constantly tense, and although the film doesn't necessarily match it, it finds so many ways to kind of get close to that throughout its runtime. It ties up a bit too nicely towards the end, but once again, do I need to keep on saying this? It's just a masterpiece. At number 11, I'm going for The Idiot, which is probably the most underrated Kurosawa film in my opinion. It rarely gets mentioned at all. It's based on the Dostoevsky novel, and it's about basically what it means to be happy or what it means to love, and about how often ignorance is what leads to true happiness. It's about how to be a perfectly good person requires you to be ignorant. To know of the truth, to know of evil, prevents people from having true love. And I think ultimately it's a really moving film about what it means to love and to find happiness, and also to just deal with conflicts of inner peace. And whilst it is certainly, you know, dark and strange, and it's not Kurosawa's preferred cut, supposedly an hour has been removed, I think overall it's a really strong masterpiece. It is coherent, if overburdened with characters, and I just think this is a lovely film that also managed to make me really think and care about the events that are often quite dark, and I think that's a real testament to Kurosawa's strength as a director. So now, the top 10. At number 10, I've gone for The Hidden Fortress, which is essentially the film that inspired Star Wars. It's a really simple film, and it just has a few kind of key characters, but what well-defined and brilliant characters they are. It's a really fun, action-packed movie made with real technical skill. It's a really enjoyable film, and, you know, one of the many films in kind of the peak of Kurosawa's just making entertaining films phase. It's really fun stuff, and I think it's one of the most entertaining films he ever made, and so it's just a masterpiece that's watchable at any time. At number 9 is Throne of Blood, which is Kurosawa's attempt to adapt Macbeth. And I think Shakespeare and Kurosawa are a match made in heaven. They go together so well. Kurosawa uses this opportunity to dig deep into rich Shakespearean themes, and the film is utterly rich in them and rich in character because of that. The action, especially towards the end, is amazing. And as always with these type of movies, they're just really entertaining. I think this is really awesome, tense filmmaking from a master, and is just one of Kurosawa's greatest films. At number 8, I'm placing Rashomon, the film that made Kurosawa famous. This film is obviously remarkable and timeless. It deals with subjectivity and how we can take an event and not really know what's real. It has so many ideas within it, and it's also so imaginative and inventive. It's a film which is small and slight at times, but it really makes us think about everything that we've ever seen and how we can trust anything. The fact that it was an innovative film that changed cinema forever is just an added bonus. You know, it's a really genuine masterwork even if no one had ever found it. I think this is so great, and obviously the Kurosawa film that everyone should at least see once, if only for the historical importance of it. At number 7, I'm going for Jimbo, which basically kick-started the spaghetti western craze, because A Fistful of Dollars is an unofficial remake of this, and that's another thing you can add to Kurosawa's long list of works he inspired and cinema he changed. This is just a really simple film. It's just about a guy in a town with two opposing factions, and he just picks fights, and it's a very interesting way of looking at factionalism and looking at people falling apart whilst doing just shallow action that's really, really fun. The technique is superb. It's one of Kurosawa's best put together films, and it's utterly gripping and engrossing and totally entertaining. It is a really magnificent movie that I think is just holds up as just an action classic. At number 6, I've gone for Kajimusha, which came out in 1980 and won Kurosawa the Palme d'Or. It basically deals with a lord who dies and is replaced by a double to keep up appearances and to prevent the enemies from attacking, and I think it's a really wonderful film. It is an epic amongst epics because of all of Kurosawa's films, this might have the biggest scale. It's in wonderful colour and was a return to form after like 10 years of Kurosawa having difficulty with his films. This is just beautifully back to basics. It's back to what he was doing during the Golden Era, but now there's a much bigger piece of cynicism to it. It's basically a critique in a way of feudalism and being loyal and subservient to a system that doesn't reward you. And I think in a way it's a richer, maturer Kurosawa basically delivering another perfect movie. At number 5, I picked Redbeard, which is Kurosawa's last film with Mifune. It's an utterly moving film. It's about a doctor who looks after his patients in both their mental health and their physical health. It's a film about finding compassion and love for everybody, and about never looking down on the downtrodden. It starts off with an arrogant doctor who learns to become humbled, and it is such a moving tale. I think this is one of the purest films ever made in a sense, and it's about finding goodness innate in everybody. And it's about looking at the world with those eyes of caring and forgiveness that I think gives it one of the most humanist angles of Kurosawa's entire career. It's a moving masterpiece and one of the finest films ever made on the topic of healthcare and love. At number 4, I've gone for High and Low, which is Kurosawa's greatest crime movie of the many that he made. It is a technical masterpiece. The first hour is beyond perfect. The way the cinematography is set inside one room and is so perfectly taut and constructed is amazing. The film has this really wonderful sensibility of just being dark but also finding goodness within people, whilst also dealing with a film that actually is about someone who is just bad. And I think that's kind of interesting. It's a really probing film with a lot of deep questions, whilst also being just a true masterwork that is tense from beginning to end. I think this is one of the greatest films of the 1960s in all honesty, and I honestly think Kurosawa, peaked in a lot of minor ways in this film. This is one of the greatest films ever made, and the fact that this is only number 4 just tells you how good Kurosawa is. At number 3, I've placed Ran, which is Kurosawa's adaptation of King Lear. And this is a perfect film. This is so good. So Ran essentially is just King Lear, but it's done in the Japanese mountains, and it digs deep into the Shakespearean themes of guilt and of humanity. But it has this particularly twisted kind of nihilist edge to it about chaos and the way that chaos in feudal times manifests itself. Much has been said of Kurosawa's worldviews in his early films, but Ran is the antithesis of what he was originally making. It is a film about despair. It's about beautiful, chaotic despair, and about how people turn on each other, about how loyalty does not exist, about how people are individuals to their own detriment. And I think it is a wonderful piece that is constructed amazingly. Every frame is literally a painting, and it's fantastic. one of the best films ever made, and probably the greatest Shakespeare adaptation that has ever been done. At number 2, I've gone for Ikiru, which is a film about learning to live and what it means to live. Sadly, many people don't really realise, how to live their lives fully until it's too late, which is exactly what this film is about. And it's an utterly moving film. It's one of the most moving films ever made, and it's a perfect example of what I might call happy sad cinema. I think this is totally charming, and I think we should all watch this film and learn from it on how to really live our lives in a more full manner. The filmmaking is obviously amazing, as it always is with Kurosawa movies, but this one just has a really special place in the heart of everyone who watches it, because it is so deeply humbling as a movie, and its message is so pure in intention. So number 1, obviously, Seven Samurai. How could it not be Seven Samurai? This is a perfect movie, and everyone should know that. I mean, the basic premise, 7 samurai protect a village from bandits. From there we get deep and meaningful looks at what it means to be poor, what it means to be a samurai. We get great character development, we get innovative character development, we get a film that inspired literally hundreds of movies. And it's all centred down so much. Mifune's character in this film is possibly the greatest character in all cinema, and I would argue possibly has the greatest character development. It makes you cry, it makes you cheer, it's so moving. It's 3.5 hours and feels like 3.5 minutes. It's one of those rare flawless films, and it only improves on multiple watches. It's really, really amazing, and I don't think you can really make a film of this kind any better than this. It is truly masterful. Seven Samurai, number 1, no question. Okay, so that was my very long ranking. If you want to know more details on any of my thoughts on these films, check the description. There's all kinds of reviews and writing that I've done. I would love to hear how you would rank Kurosawa's films, even if you've only seen a few. Just let me know. I'd love to hear in the comments. Thank you for watching, and please like, subscribe, etc. And you never know, I might do another video during the lockdown, because, what else am I going to do? So stay safe, and thanks for watching.